People who think CO2 is bad because my sociology professor told me so. And gentlemen, okay, I watched this video by this casually explained character, so I wrote down some notes to it. And it's not too bad. It does go off the rails a little bit near the end, but he uses the term excess when talking about reducing emissions, but the term excess is quite ambiguous. I have two SUVs and neither of them are excess or excessive. I take short showers not because I'm necessarily trying to save the planet, but because I pay the bill. The money I save on that can be put towards the excess gasoline I use in my SUVs because I like a roomy, comfortable vehicle. And the SUVs of today are a lot better than anything your great-grandfather or grandfather drove. I also have two computers that's probably considered excess by a Bernie Sanders supporter with no savings and no work history, living in a cardboard box-sized public housing apartment in Brooklyn, but I guess that's the life you have when your baby daddies don't live with you or your kids. Sue me. I'm not accusing Casually Explained of being that, just mentioning it casually. He mentions that if your country gets all its energy from renewable fuels, the carbon footprint of your electronics is basically zero, and perhaps if you got all your energy from nuclear power, that would be the case. But if you're hypothetically faking that all your energy comes from so-called renewables, excluding hydroelectric, you're going to need some sort of fossil fuel backup just in case there's a few days when the sun doesn't shine and those pesky clouds and the wind doesn't blow. In addition, those inevitable fossil fuel backups will create more emissions as they ramp their production up and down to keep up with the unpredictable nature of solar and wind power, which, by the way, usually the peak usage times that you'll need is when the wind blows the least and the sun shines the least. He also mentions that electric cars will almost be zero in terms of emissions, and I suppose that might be true if you don't count the large batteries. Those are the large electric vehicles, the large batteries that have to be replaced every so often, and don't count the emissions from that, or if you plug it in and the recharge is coming from natural gas or coal. If your recharge is coming from wind and solar, again, you're going to have those fossil fuel backups that you're going to need. If the recharge is coming from a nuclear power plant, and I am in favor of nuclear power sans subsidies, it is a rather large rent seeker. If the recharge is from nuclear, it would be good if you don't count the mining that goes into getting the uranium. Up until then, the video wasn't too bad, but it starts to get off the rails around the 6-minute mark when he talks about CO2 mitigation. I'm not saying that we should spew CO2 in the atmosphere just for the sake of it, but the increase in CO2 levels since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, and see the link under the video where I cover all this in detail, has resulted in a greening of planet Earth. A publication in remote sensing, I'll cover some of these, a publication in remote sensing back in 2013 stated that CO2 fertilization was more important than climate variation in determining the magnitude of the temporal trend in the leaf area index at the global scale in each hemisphere and for most of the modeled plant functional types over their study period, in agreement with a previous study using an independently developed model. We'll get into some other models later. But the satellites are telling us the same thing. A team of Chinese, Australian, and American researchers set out to investigate trends in vegetational change across China over the 1982 to 2009 timeframe. This was in Global Change Biology back in 2014. The researchers found most regions of China experienced a greening trend indicative of enhanced growth across the time period studied. Overall, 56% of the area studied experienced a significant increase in greening at the 95% confidence level when using the globe map data set, compared with 54 and 31% using the glass and GIMIS data sets. These regions with the largest greening trends include southwest China and part of the North China Plain. They also report that at the country scale, the average trend of LAIGS, that's the leaf area index growing season, attributed to rising CO2 concentration, is estimated to be about 85% of the average leaf area index growing season trend, estimated by satellite data sets. Even evil China is greening Who'da thunk it? The journal Nature Climate Change reported back in 2016 that we show a persistent and widespread increase of growing season integrated leaf area index screening over 25 to 50% of the global vegetated area, whereas less than 4% of the globe shows a decreasing leaf area index or a browning. What is also mentioned is that the climate models produce a trend towards browning, and this can especially be seen in the western United States. The climate vegetation model produced large in area and magnitude browning trends in the western U.S., driven by a general drying trend over the period of record. The observations, on the other hand, show little, if any, trends towards browning and instead show a general mild greening over the western United States. Many commentators, including the recently deceased Freeman Dyson, attribute crop yield increases, massive crop yield increases over the past century, in part to CO2 fertilization. There are other factors such as better technology for farmers and genetic modifications. Thank you, native Iowan Norman Borlaug. But CO2 fertilization is a big part. This casually explained character doesn't come out in hair on fire fashion like some folks do concerning CO2, making it the harbinger of death, but he does imply it. Not sure where he got that notion from, but perhaps it was from a public school teacher that was teaching kids not how to think, but what to think. I will end with this. I actually had an ecokook progressive tell me one time that we couldn't survive in an atmosphere that was pure CO2, after I pointed out to him that CO2 fertilization has resulted in a greening of planet Earth and various carbon sinks ratcheting up their CO2 sequestration activities. That sure was a head scratcher. Nobody's saying we could survive such an atmosphere, just as a small exposure to radon is beneficial to you, but 100,000 parts per million of radon is bad. No kidding. One 12-ounce beer is good for you as well, but drinking a case every night for a few decades will give you cirrhosis. Nobody is saying that we should add CO2 just for the sake of it, but the scientific literature indicates that this added CO2 since the Industrial Revolution has played a large part in crop yield increases, another thing the Malthusians were wrong on more than once, and a greening of planet Earth. Again, check the links under the video. I'll leave two of them under there. Second one, scroll down to the section on crop yields. Have a nice day, and don't thank me now.